welcome everyone. We are so excited to have you join us for today's Cost of Cloud webinar. This is actually our second Cost of Cloud webinar, with our first one being about 2 years ago. We're back with new data and insights where we surveyed 500 plus industry professionals. We are so excited to introduce our incredible lineup of speakers. But before I do, I wanted to mention just a few quick housekeeping things. At the end of today's presentation, we should have a few minutes to go through some Q&A. So if you have any questions, please put them in the comments section and we'll make sure we get those covered. If for some reason we run out of time, please feel free to email those questions to sales@civo.com and we'll be happy to help. Now, we've got a great lineup of speakers today who will walk you through everything from the latest trends in the cloud market to actionable strategies you can apply right away. My name is Sophia McKee. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at CIVO, and I'm going to be your host for today's webinar. Today, I have Mark Boost, our CEO and founder, joining us, along with Dinesh Madrekar, our CTO, and Simon Hansford, our new Chief Commercial Officer. So to kick things off, Mark, I'd love to go ahead and start with you. It's been about 2 years since our last survey on the cost of cloud. What has been your impression of this year's results compared to those we saw 2 years ago?
Well, first of all, hello everyone. I think the thing that probably strikes me first of all is that, some things don't surprise me, because I think when I look back at the survey 2 years ago, it was actually very similar patterns of costs were rising, so that doesn't surprise me. But I think what jumped out at me in this survey is the sheer scale of those increases, and then really they've got higher than ever. And so that was the thing that really grabbed my attention, and probably comes as no surprise to a lot of people. And I kind of want to take it back for a moment to, as well, the early days of cloud computing. And as we all probably know, Amazon and AWS pretty much defined what cloud computing was in those early days, and taking it back to kind of reInvent, which is the Amazon conference. And at the very first AWS reInvent, Andy Jassy, who's the current CEO of the actual Amazon business, the overall Amazon business, but many years ago was the CEO of AWS, he stood up on stage at reInvent and said that companies should be able to lower their costs by using cloud computing and lower the variable cost than if they actually hosted it themselves. So I guess a lot of companies were sold on this promise of this sort of lower cost, these lower variable costs. But when you fast forward to today and what our survey is showing, that reality is very, very different from what was promised back then, and those costs are really sort of scaling out of control now. So I do worry that the cloud model is broken right now, or partly broken right now. And my fear for the industry is, where does this end? Because these increasing costs are really starting to hurt companies.
Yeah, Dinesh, is there anything that you'd like to add?
You're on mute.
There we go. Always something. Thank you, Mark. I was just going to pick up on what you were saying about the promises of public cloud. It's that cheap, scalable, on-demand compute, and that's what we love about cloud. The ability to just go into something like AWS Console or one of the others and say, "Hey, I need to get some compute, be that a database or a managed cloud, managed Kubernetes, and have it there pretty much instantly," was really, really great, and still is when you get that use case of it. But you then have to consider all of the pricing around that as well, and that's what people are really worried about at the moment. So the only way you can get now this cheap price is to now commit to doing a long-term pricing or long-term commitment for the compute, which really goes against what public cloud should be of burstable and scalable. One of the other things I think over the past few years as well is this Broadcom and VMware acquisition and everything that we're seeing on the pricing side there in particular. So whereas traditionally you would be able to host on-premise with VMware, we're now seeing huge price increases there as well. So no matter where we're looking at with cloud, the price is just going up everywhere.
Thank you, Dinesh. Simon, given that you weren't a part of the previous survey, what stood out to you the most from this year's survey?
I think there are three things that really stood out to me. Number one, that the prices are rising. I think the figure was 59% of respondents saw price rise over the last 12 months. That the hyperscalers remain dominant. In fact, that's gone up over since the report 2 years ago, from 65 to 74%. And then workloads are being repatriated and being taken back to traditional dedicated IT. And I guess, those three facts tell me that there's a lack of competition in the marketplace and supports Mark's belief that the cloud's broken. It doesn't mean that it's technically broken, but that initial promise of the cloud is just no longer being delivered. Costs are too high. Developers are locking themselves into a single vendor. Pricing's confusing, and there's not enough choice in the marketplace. And I think this is something that should be concerning to us as individuals, as business leaders, and to our regulators. They need to be very concerned about this fact. So, kind of bottom line, I think with some vendors, the cloud in reality is just not hitting our expectations.
Thank you, Simon. Kind of going off of that, for those who have seen our recent white paper on the cost of cloud in 2024, Mark, would you be able to give us an overview of that research?
Yeah, there's a lot of data in there, and I know we'll be sending the full report to people after this webinar. But I guess, a few key stats that jumped out at me, and I think that demonstrates Simon's point that the reality is very different from people's expectations. And as you can see on the screen, that 59% of organisations that we surveyed reported a cloud increase, cost increase in the last 12 months. And I think what's more telling is that 69% of those saw increases of over 10%, and that goes back to what I said earlier about the sheer scale of these increases. And it's not actually up on the screen, but 32% of those organisations actually saw a rise of more than 25%. So these are increases that are way above inflation and are really hampering companies' growth and inhibiting them from investing these in other areas to grow their business. And the last stat on screen there is around half, or pretty much half, the organisations believe that the cost of cloud is too high. And this goes back to that kind of message about the cloud being broken. The confidence is dropping. People are starting to think about repatriating away from the cloud. And we don't think at CIVO it should be that way. We think that that's wrong. So I think that they're the telling things that I'm certainly taking from this survey.
I think, Mark, as well, to pick up on some of those, is that we should be in an industry where things like Moore's law, where the power of compute is increasing year on year, should mean that we're able to get more power and more compute out of less hardware, which you'd think would be bringing the price down, but we're really not seeing that as well. I was at our conference in Berlin a few weeks ago, talking to someone about the cost per vCPU actually going up year on year. So you're paying more for the same performance. And they were saying that they were doing these performance metrics and saying that between 10 years ago and now, the performance metric per vCPU has stayed the same, even though we're seeing all of these advancements in compute and the energy efficiency. We should be seeing that in costs going down, but it's just not happening. And then, as you say, these costs are going up more and more above inflation, which is really, really worrying.
Yeah, and I mean, it's consistent with what I see. I'm speaking to customers, to partners, to analysts, to press, every single day. And the message is very consistent that costs are rising. Our research, Mark's just said, 59% saw that happening. Dark Matters, who many of you know, a very influential technology research org, their figures were 82% of cloud users have found that their costs are spiraling. So very consistent, however you read that. Yeah, and indeed, as you see on the screen here, in the mainstream press are now covering this because it's such an important topic to us all.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit shocking. From a lot of the discussions that we've seen in the industry, it's apparent that the three hyperscalers really dominate the market. However, we keep seeing rising costs year on year. Why is this?
Well, I think that, first that there's a misnomer here that, something I feel I've been pointing out for many years, that the idea that the hyperscalers commoditize the cloud or they're driving the price down through their scale is quite frankly just wrong. If we take AWS as just one example, their product range is confusing. There's significant overlap in those products. They've got different UIs to each one of them. There's different pricing structures. It makes it just hard to use. It's almost mandatory to get accredited on the platforms. I mean, this year, another great example, they decided to charge for IP addresses, and instantly, their revenues went over $1 billion through that new charging mechanism. So please don't misunderstand me. The hyperscalers aren't all wrong. They've got many great, happy customers, and they have their place in the marketplace. But an anti-competitive market that we have does not help reduce pricing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Simon. And I think this comes from the growing pressure that these giant hyperscale companies have from their shareholders to beat their earnings each quarter, and really the organic growth that they were seeing 5 or 10 years ago is not there anymore. So really what we're seeing now is that the phrase nickel and diming of their existing customers and trying to extract as much value for themselves from these customers without giving the customers any value. So I think that's it's certainly an exciting place for Civo to be, because that's the complete opposite of how we see the market, and we see it in a way that it should be fair, predictable pricing, very open sort of multi-cloud world. And so my opinion is they're probably on some borrowed time in that regard, and if they keep pushing people too far, eventually people will start to leave. And I think that's why we're seeing repatriation now and away from cloud in that regard. So it's certainly a time of change. I feel that things have to change, and I think people are starting to speak with their feet now.
Now, with all this in mind, what would you say are the top challenges in the cloud industry?
I think, thinking back just outside of the pricing that we've seen and everything, we've seen a huge number of layoffs over the past year as well. I think if we go back to the news cycle from the start of the year, just seeing lots and lots of the technical teams being reduced. And I know we've got these stats up at the moment, but you really got to think that was a huge focus at the start of the year, and it's putting a huge amount of pressure on the technical teams on top of all of the cloud challenges that they've got at the moment. The spend and managing cloud costs is number one, I think, for the second time running now, according to this Flexera study as well. So it's almost like these tech teams who have been reduced in size really have to focus away from the core of their role of delivering technology to something like managing the spends, and the pressure is coming in different ways. It's no longer how can we deliver this great new bit of technology or keep the business running. It's focusing on costs, reduce headcount, reduce the different technologies that you're using. And it's being driven by not a point of innovation, but just keeping everything afloat at the moment. I think the key is like tech teams are being asked to deliver more with less, and we've probably seen the rise of something like FinOps out of the back of this at the moment as well, which is crazy.
Maybe it's the way that the research is from Flexera has been framed. But Dinesh is absolutely right there. There is nothing there about the challenges of innovation, aligning with the business, helping with the business. It's all technical issues caused by the way the cloud is structured today.
Yeah, and things like putting things on like governance and compliance, lack of expertise, right? There's nothing here about what at least I believe IT and technology should be delivering, which is innovation. It is about making people's life easier. It's about running businesses more efficiently, which will lead to cost savings, but it's not top of all of the CTOs I'm talking to at the moment. They're not coming to us with what cool new things are you doing? How can we accelerate our business? It's how can I save costs? Which is it's a saddening place to be when that's what's leading conversations about technology.
There's some really good points there. I think picking up on that Flexera survey, that with those kind of skills, with companies having less resources to deal with these problems, and when you think of hyperscale providers, picking up on some of the points that Simon made around having to go through many different certifications to even understand how to use their products, they're insanely complicated, and simplifying cloud, I think, is really important. And if we can actually come to some common standards and common APIs and various things like that, cloud would be a lot simpler. So we should be focused on that innovation and reducing the complexity and effectively reducing the cost. So I think it comes back to we do need change. And certainly at CEVO, we're trying to drive that change. We're one voice, that's really pushing that hard. And there are other emerging providers that I think companies should evaluate outside of these hyperscalers.
I know out of our survey as well, one of the things that came up was about a drive towards multi-cloud. And I think that's where change can be driven, right? People are, as you say, Mark, voting with their feet and repatriating, but they're also getting some mobility to move across different cloud vendors and move workloads to where they can get the most, not only bang for their buck, but hopefully some innovation as well and some new technologies.
Thank you, Dinesh. Now, with all these ongoing challenges within the cloud industry, what are organizations actually doing about it?
Well, I think if you look at our research, they're saying 53% of companies, individuals are taking action. I guess so you've got to look at the corollary of that and say 47% are doing nothing, which is quite scary and clearly is costing them money. I know Dinesh is very passionate, rightly so, with a strong opinion about FinOps. So I'm going to leave that particular item for him. But there is a significant amount of money being spent on consultancies. The big four, all of them have business lines that are worth over $100 million, each of them around consultancy, around cost savings and cloud, how to take best advantage of it. And then there's thousands globally of much smaller, excellent companies that are really doing the same, just helping people save money using the hyperscalers. Now, if cloud was delivering the simplicity that we've talked about, if the pricing was clear, transparent pricing models, and you could easily migrate workloads to competitive market, then software tools, consultancy would, or quite frankly, shouldn't exist.
FinOps is absolutely mad that we have an entire industry, an entire set of tools. We've got engineers in the open source community spending their time not giving something new, not giving something shiny, not spending all of this like human ingenuity to create something great, but spending it on how we can undo some of the ingenuity that these cloud providers have put into their costing models. And it's mad. It drives me absolutely insane. But you see some of these invoices that come out of a cloud provider and it's got other listed at the bottom. And you need to start digging in and spending time into where that costing has been used. Then looking at the pricing tools as well that come up, right? You can start putting in, yes, I need some compute instance, I need some data storage, I know I need some bandwidth, but then you really need to understand, oh wait, is that bandwidth going between regions? Is it going out to the end user? Is it going for backups? Each one of these has a different line item that it's costing. And to give a prediction at the start of a project of how much it's going to cost is just not possible with the tools that are out there. And that's why FinOps is there. It's there to try and help you create that or undo some of the decisions that you've made because you've not been able to plan up front, right? There's no FinOps tool that you can say, I've got this project, how much is it going to cost? It's all, I have built this, it's been running for 6 months, and it's costing 10 times more than I even budgeted for. How can I save money and reduce costs? Which is a completely backwards way of doing it. You know, you don't go into a car lease and say, I've got an X amount of budget for a car. You then get the car, you drive it around for 6 months, and suddenly you go, it's costing you 10 times as much to drive around. Like how is that a thing in the world that we're existing in?
Yeah, good point. Now, what if somebody doesn't want to invest in FinOps? Are there any alternatives to it?
Well, I guess as I've just said, I couldn't agree more with Dinesh and his view on FinOps. There should be no need for it; it just shouldn't exist. So, you know, I'm a firm believer, we all are, of moving workloads or moving to a multi-cloud, multi-vendor strategy is what companies need to be doing now. There's many aspects to this, but you know, technical aspects, commercial aspects, but pricing clearly is always going to be a very stark and you know a frequent driver. Naturally is. So in May this year, we used the hyperscalers' own online calculators to produce this comparison chart that you can see on the screen today. Now, as you see, the pricing is pretty stark there, isn't it? Yeah, Cevo's pricing is between 2.5 to 3 times cheaper. And as Mark rightly pointed out, there are other competitors in the market that similarly have great pricing and undercut what we are overpaying today on those hyperscalers. So moving from a hyperscaler is one very clear action that you can take. Second would, and the long term, the right answer is to implement a multi-cloud, multi-vendor strategy.
I think it's all worth noting as well on that data that's on there is that we did the same comparison 2 years ago, and prices on everything else has gone up at least 10% for no increase in performance, for no increase in features, just have gone up. And you know, there's been no investment from the hyperscaler side of things. It's just a price going up.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And to add to that as well, I know at Cevo we're very passionate about value for money, and we did remove our costs this year of any egress fees for data transfer charges, and they're something that's continually hitting certain very data-heavy companies extremely hard, and they also cause a huge lock-in for people who want to move out of these clouds. So that's always a challenge, and I know some regulators are looking at those, particularly in Europe and the UK. But that would be certainly a good move for this opening up this multi-cloud world. But I think what's interesting as well is that you said, like I said before, a lot of people are starting to vote with their feet. A lot of people are moving away from hyperscalers, and a lot of people are considering moving off cloud. And there was a recent survey by IDC that showed that 71% of companies plan to move some or all of their workloads off the cloud in the next 2 years. And that's a huge number. I saw a similar report done by Barclays, the bank, and they did a CIO survey, and it was at 80% companies were looking to move some of their workloads off the cloud. So I think that's kind of worrying for the cloud industry. And it goes back to what I was saying about potentially the cloud is broken. And I think that's one way, obviously, to try and look to save money is to move off the cloud and back to like we were, 10, 15 years ago, when we were racking up servers and we were, doing all the cabling and we were managing all the networks and we were doing all the security. And but a lot of companies don't necessarily have the expertise or enough resources to do that in terms of human resources. And obviously the benefits of the cloud are very clear for people to see as well, in terms of, scaling fast and almost having access to unlimited capacity as you need it. And so I think the cloud model is not broken in that sense, but it is people may almost making potentially the wrong decision because of costs. Now, it could be the right decision to come off the cloud for certain reasons of sovereignty or data privacy, or maybe in this AI world that we're moving around vast amounts of data, and maybe it makes sense to have certain things running outside the cloud. But it also makes so much sense to have certain applications within the cloud and scaling those applications. So I think that's certainly something that going to this sort of hybrid cloud strategy, this multi-cloud strategy, I think that's really important for the future. And then we have openness and we have kind of commonality and open standards, and that's certainly something that we champion at Civo, and not having that vendor lock-in. We do a great job. We believe we do a great job. But if for some reason we're not doing a great job, then people should have freedom to move, not because they feel trapped in an ecosystem they can't leave.
I remember a story you were telling me, Mark, about when we first started doing hosting, that you used to be able to get your files and FTP them up onto a server. And then when you weren't happy with it and you weren't happy with your provider, you just FTP, you copy them down, you upload them somewhere else, and you can easily move them. And I think that's sort of the joy of what multi-cloud should be, and all of the technology that we should be creating is that same feeling of being able to just pick something up, move it over, drop it down, and everything should just work. And it's definitely not the case that the cloud is delivering there on that innovation side at the moment.
I think that's absolutely right. And the other, pick up a point Mark making, I think there's a real danger that some companies, jump from the fat to the fire almost, and they go from all cloud to no cloud, or from one vendor we go to the next vendor. And that is not what we're recommending. It's not the right thing to be doing. Yeah, it truly is multi-cloud, multi-vendor. Because if you think about it, you look at and it's something that surprises me today. Large corporates, large enterprises have got so many different types of workloads, yet they treat them all as one and say, okay, we're putting all of our workloads in one cloud. And yet, by definition, if you look at the technology underneath them, there's different solutions, different clouds, private, public, edge, etc., that would suit them far better than just putting them all into Civo's cloud or any of our competitors' cloud. It's not the right approach.
There was, we were on stage a few weeks ago with Kelsey Hightower, and he's got this lovely story he was saying about how to think about cloud migration or cloud transformation. And it's this idea of moving house. So the way of moving house could be seen as, I need to move from A to B, vendor A to B, or I need to move down the street. So you've got the option of jacking up your house, putting it on wheels, and just driving it down the street and dropping it off. And that's the sort of cloud migration kind of thing of just moving for cost of whatever I had in this side, pick up the house, move it over and drop it. And if you ask someone to do that when they move house, they would look at you like you're mad. Because what we really do is look inside of the house, pick up our furniture, and just move our furniture over into a new house. And that's the idea of looking at applications that we have, what they are offering, and how we can transform them into a new way of working, and moving the furniture rather than moving the entire house.
Yeah. Great point, Dinesh. So when we look at the research done as part of the Cost of Cloud white paper, we can see that the research says that almost 90% are taking no action to manage or reduce their cloud service costs. Do any of you find this surprising?
No, I mean, it doesn't surprise me at all. And, there's, as we mentioned already, there's expensive consultants that are out there. There's FinOps software that has to be implemented and uses resources to get that implemented, and then uses more resources to understand and analyze all the data that it puts out. And that costs a lot of time and money. So it doesn't surprise me that a lot of the vast majority of companies are not doing anything about it because it's a lot of work to solve this, or it's very expensive to solve this, which worries me because I think a lot of companies are really accepting the status quo of hyperscaler dominance and the escalating cost and the lock-in. And it's not going to get any better. These costs are not going to go down, not on the trajectory we've seen and we're seeing going forward. And I think, really, my recommendation is that we've talked about already, that we should be in a multi-cloud world. It shouldn't be a one vendor approach. And it doesn't have to be invest in all these expensive software consultants. You can move to other providers. There are good emerging providers, Civo, others as well. And companies should explore opportunities to save money and potentially get a better service, and also reduce the complexity, which means that they can actually do more with less in a way. So I think they're the things that I would recommend. But going back to the question, it doesn't surprise me that a lot of people aren't doing anything about it, but people should be. They should be.
I kind of worry that companies have backed themselves into a corner with the kind of the layoffs that they have done earlier and reducing the number of people in IT departments. Now they're in a position where when they need to do a migration, that the staff that are there at the moment aren't able to do that alongside all of the work that they have to be doing to just keep the day-to-day and keep the lights on. Then you have to consider a cloud migration is bringing in consultants, as Simon has already mentioned, which are incredibly expensive. The project for them to come in and do it is incredibly time consuming. And really, it's a huge risk. You kind of weigh that up against staying where you are and the price increase that's just slowly being added. Prices aren't going up 20% unless you're Broadcom. They're not going up in steps. They're just slowly being added over time. And it's a death by 1,000 paper cuts. It won't ever be enough in one go that forces you to move, but it's just going to slowly keep ramping up and ramping up.
I think that's just to add to that. I mean, I certainly think what I've seen as well, you're right, Dinesh, because it gets to a point where it suddenly is too much. We've heard it from CFOs, where it finally hits the CFO's desk and said, didn't we used to spend like, 1,000 or 2,000 a month on cloud? Suddenly this month's bill is like 20 grand. Where did that come from? Or so, so I think that there's that point, like you say, it creeps up on you, it creeps up, and then suddenly there's that tipping point where companies panic, and that's when they're reaching out to these expensive consultants and FinOps software, after the horse has bolted, really.
And I think we've seen it a lot. We talked to a lot of customers who have just suddenly had a surprise bill, because the way that the costing models are, it's not generally in control of the people that are running software on the cloud when those costs rise. There was the old sort of front page of Reddit, top of Hacker News effect, where suddenly your hosting builds skyrocketed just for the bandwidth that you were kind of doing on committed data rate. I'm talking back a while ago when we were doing data centers, but that was the effect that happened. And you're kind of seeing it now of suddenly your site gets popular. Now there are lots and lots of requests to pull data out of the S3 bucket, and your prices now go up on API requests, which you're charged for. Data east-west transfer to your server that's doing the processing, and finally transfer out to the end user. And each of those are now starting to cost you. So you suddenly become, very low run rate business on the cloud. You become hugely popular and you get hit by a massive cloud bill. It doesn't always stay in line with revenue either.
I think that's one very good example. I've seen a very different example, but that's equally as costly. Is you give your technical team the dashboard, and they get feature happy, and you suddenly using features on the cloud and products functionality that the business has got no awareness of. Not only is that significantly costing them money, because those features cost, those functionalities cost, but actually they're further locking them into those platforms. So at some stage, the CTO, the CIO, or indeed, as you said, the CFO wakes up and says, hang on, how come our costs are like that? How come we're using products we knew nothing about? And we've locked in. We've got now a massive, redevelopment, replatforming task to do if we ever want to take advantage of multi-cloud. So, one of the things that, to answer your question, Sophia, is companies need to better manage how dashboards and how functionality is being used in those cloud vendors.
I think it's kind of sad as well, though, because as a developer, as a technical person, you get given all of these shiny tools, and your initial instinct is, oh wow, I really want to play, I really want to get value. This will save me a load of time because I now don't need to manage a database. I don't need to manage a queue. And you get sucked into, as you say, Simon, being locked in. So there is one side of saying, yes, blame the technical people because they've been given a load of shiny toys. But you've also been given a load of shiny toys to try and do some really cool things. And then you get punished afterwards, right? And it's a really bad way of doing it.
I totally agree, and I apologise if I came across, saying that that's not what I meant. I'm saying that as companies look to manage spend, it is one of the additional thoughts or controls they might think of. No one wants to stop innovation, absolutely not. But you've got to know where your spend is.
Absolutely, and it's kind of, as I said, about being able to predict what the price is going to be, right? If you're not able, as a developer or as a technical person, to upfront go to the business with a business case of, if we do this on our own, it's going to cost X. If we do it using this great tool, it's going to cost Y. There's a case that you can make, but it's always 6 months down the line when you suddenly realize what the real cost of Y is, and you think, I wish I'd done it myself.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. Better articulated. Thank you.
So kind of going off of that, speaking of shiny things, we've largely been talking about the public cloud. So let's pivot to one of the hottest topics right now, AI. Mark, are we seeing the same trends with GPUs?
I knew we could go a whole session without talking about AI. We haven't got the data points on this yet. It's too early, isn't it? And I think what we'll be interested in when we do our next survey, I think we can capture more data around this and show, what that kind of spend is and how that's growing within that kind of AI and GPU kind of market. I think one thing I maybe fear for, companies is that, again, going back to, cost spiraling and some of the points that, Simon made about when you're using different providers, that there is a lot of complexity involved. And I fear that one slip of the finger, and you've spun up some extra GPUs or you've left them turned on or whatever, these are really expensive. I mean, they're seriously expensive, some of these GPUs. So there's a danger as well that this kind of cost control becomes even worse. And with those high ticket items that GPUs are. So that's certainly a fear of mine that I can see. And so going back to that, I think it's very important that we have transparency, we have predictability in the way that things are offered. But as I said, I think at the moment we haven't quite got the data points to see what that kind of escalation in costs is since AI has come on the scene.
I think this market segment is hot at the moment. It's growing so fast. There's so much noise, so much hype there. There's a tremendous amount of uptake, but indeed there is a supply shortage as well. So I think personally, the research that we presented is as valid in the public cloud as it is in the AI GPU market. Maybe the next time we do it, we'll segment that research. It'd be quite interesting to see, indeed. But I'd go back to pricing. It's always a great indicator, and it tells its own story here, that there's a massive opportunity for cost saving. So, again, a little bit of research we did back in July this year, where CIVO is about 50% of the cost of the hyperscalers. But what's really interesting is there is a very competitive marketplace of large GPU suppliers, outside the hyperscalers here. And actually they're similar, not too dissimilar from us. So yeah, I'm really pleased to be able to say that we've got good supply of NVIDIA. We've got the A100s, the H100s, and very shortly the 200s, the H200s, which are pretty significant, will be available. And we're going to be dropping our pricing. Actually, over the price that we see on the screen here, we're going to be dropping it between 30 and up to 50% on some models. So, because there is a supply shortage, if you want to be the first to take advantage of this before we announce the pricing, because it's going to be first come, first served, drop me a line. My email is simon@cevo.com. I'll happily speak to you about what we're about to announce.
I think my real worry about AI and Gen AI and using all of these language models is that people are being offered at the moment a lot of free credit to start using these services. And it's really, really enticing to start moving over and just consuming, which is the same story that we've heard with other public cloud services about developers having something really new, really, really shiny, unable to predict how much it's going to cost. And with free credits, you don't have to worry about them at the moment. But when free credits end, the prices there for some of the services are absolutely massive. And you're going to get stung if you don't have an exit plan or a migration plan of what you can do once those credits run out. And I think AI is just the same story we've heard, and it's up to us as industry, like CTOs and everything, to learn from what we've seen before and not make the same mistakes again.
Thank you, Dinesh. In the interest in this year's survey has been immense, and I understand that we've had some amazing feedback and press interest. I'd love to hear from the three of you. What are some of the key takeaways for everyone on the call today?
I think I was really buoyed to see that multi-cloud and strategies around multi-cloud were on there, but it felt like it was being driven for the wrong reasons of cost saving rather than for innovation and for being able to move between and survive different cloud outages or anything. So I really think multi-cloud is the future, but it needs to be driven not from cost, from innovation.
I think that's very true. Absolutely. My summary is not too dissimilar. My takeaway there, pricing is being kept artificially high by a lack of true competition in the marketplace. And then customers are not truly embracing multi-cloud, multi-vendor approach, which they need to be doing to benefit from the functionality, the simplicity, and the lower prices that are available out there. I repeat, not every single application or workload is best suited to a single cloud or a single supplier.
I think adding to that, Simon, it's the reason why we see people forced into a single supplier is because that's the best way to get cost efficiency. If you can pre-commit to a certain amount of spend, you suddenly get everything at 30% of the list price that you're seeing there. And I think people really need to consider that 30% of list price is still giving all of these hyperscalers profit and the massive profits that we're seeing. So just think, if you're not doing that, the crazy prices that all these cloud providers are running at.
Yeah, it's a very good point. It demonstrates how high the prices are to start with, and that's something at CEVO, we believe that we should have value for money out of the gate, and our pricing is set up that way without all the hidden charges and things. So you don't necessarily need to commit to long terms. Of course, we'll give commitments as well if people do actually want to pay for a longer term contract. But at the same time, our on-demand pricing is highly competitive compared to hyperscalers. But I guess, my takeaway from this survey is that, and if I'm totally honest, nothing really surprises me in this survey, because I've been talking about this stuff for a long time, and the need for change, and it just really reinforces that need for change, and that it really shouldn't be the way it currently is. It's just goes back to that whole thing that the cloud is broken, and we need to do something about it. And Civo is one of the companies that is pushing and driving for that change. Companies ultimately are feeling frustrated, and they're feeling trapped, and costs are escalating. And going back to what we've talked about, this multi-cloud kind of world, we should be in a place where that is a reality, and it hasn't become a reality yet. And I think as cloud providers, we should be judged on service quality, on uptime, on performance and customer service and things like that. And if any cloud provider is not providing any of those 4 things, they should have freedom to move to a different cloud provider. But that's exactly the opposite to the status quo that exists today, where many companies feel trapped in hyperscalers. They're not necessarily getting a good service. It doesn't necessarily fit their needs. It's complex, and they can't leave. I find it very, very extremely hard to leave. So I think that's the key takeaway from this, is that for me, it just further reinforces that people are frustrated with the escalation of these cloud costs.
Very much so.
Thank you, Mark. So it looks like we have a couple of minutes left to kind of go through some of the questions that we have in the chat. We also had a few sent in earlier. So some of these we've touched on since they were asked, but if there's anybody that would like to just add a little bit more context, we can do that. Otherwise, we can move on to the next one. But the first one I have is, how do we manage our cloud costs when using cloud cost management tools such as Datadog? Often surge our metric queries and even further raise our cloud costs. Is the only solution to wait and see?
I mean, this is kind of going back to what I was saying in this, right? Is that these tools have been designed specifically so that you cannot predict it. And it's a case of really calling out vendors that do this. And I mean, take Datadog as an example, as you pointed out. I don't think it's entirely their fault, and that it can be laid at their feet. We know that they're hosted on AWS. And when you start sending more data and requesting data out, the money's not going directly to Datadog, right? It's going into funding AWS's bandwidth bill that Datadog have to pay. So it's really holding all of the vendors to account and saying, I'm not happy with my egress costs going direct to AWS, and also saying, hey, Datadog, you need to be putting pressure on because this just isn't right.
Thank you, Dinesh. Okay, I have another one from Zach. Has Civo done an analysis on the escalation in cost around engineering and support minutes spent managing and chewing on the complexity involved in the expanding complexity associated with and resulting from cloud expansion, AI proliferation, and the necessary operational upskilling of operational staff?
Wow.
I don't think we've done any research directly on any of that, but I think it's born out of the research that we've been seeing, right, of being asked to do more with less. And yeah, I think it's just going to get worse. And I think it's also kind of built into cloud providers of making it complex so that you get locked in. And I think it's definitely part of their strategy.
Thank you. Another one, a little bit shorter. Is FinOps here to stay?
Well, we must give that back to Dinesh as well.
No. But I mean, I hope not. I think if we are able to all vote with our feet and really put pressure, then FinOps shouldn't be there, and it's going to and holding these cloud vendors to account, cloud providers to account.
Yeah, to add to that as well, there was a cloud documentary, and there was a FinOps consultant, on that documentary, and he was literally saying himself, my job should never exist. And he was very open and honest about it, but he knew right now it does exist, and there's a lot of money for people to be made out of it. But I found that quite funny that someone actually is employed in that role didn't believe that his job should exist.
I think what's going to happen is...
That's a great video, Mark, that's from Dark Matters. I referenced them earlier, called Clouded, and it reinforces a lot of what we've been saying today. So well worth a watch to hear from a different set of people.
I think what's going to happen is we're going to need a whole load of AI models and GPUs to take over doing all of the FinOps calculations. And then we're going to start asking why our AI and GPU bill is so high. And we'll start having to hire humans back to work out why the ML is taking so long.
Circular technology.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So I've got a few more here. This one I know we covered towards the end of the presentation, but if you want to just reiterate this one, there's a shortage of GPUs in the market. Where can we find them?
Well, I was going to say a one-word answer, Civo. They're available, but stock is limited throughout the marketplace because it's hot. There's a lot of need and there's a shortage of supply. But at the moment we have some, and as I said, if you contact me on simon@civo.com, that stock is going to disappear quickly as we make the announcements we're about to, as we reduce pricing. So get in fast.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, so this last one we've actually heard before. I believe it comes from the old adage that from IBM that says that you will not get fired by buying from IBM. This person asked, no one gets fired from choosing a hyperscaler. They are safe and have more services. Why should we change?
I'll take that one, I guess. Well, I quite often say to people, maybe they should be fired for buying from a hyperscaler. When you kind of see the level of these costs that are escalating, the kind of the vendor lock-in that you have. And my belief is that, Simon touched on some of this, is that not every workload should be in a hyperscaler. And, like he said, hyperscalers got their place. They're very expensive. They have lots of different services. But we've done a previous survey, and it's not covered in this one, but I think it was something along the lines of 60% of companies that we surveyed use less than 15 services in hyperscalers. So for the majority of customers, you don't need the number of services and all that complexity in your life. And a lot of companies use simple Kubernetes or compute, a database, maybe a load balancer, storage, and a few tools around the edge. But I don't know how many services AWS has now, like 150 or something. But the vast majority of companies are not using those. So I think there's good value to be had from companies like Civo that do a smaller set of services. We've got about 20 different services, but we do them very, very, very well. And for most companies, it will cover all their expectations and all of their needs, and provide better value. So I think, for me, I think people, buy into the narrative, really, and now, ironically, are paying the price for it. So I think it's certainly important to open up this multi-cloud world where we should be really looking at emerging providers and challenger providers that do a very good job in what they do. And Civo is one of them, I believe, but there are others as well. It's not good to have that monopoly, and it's not good for industry. It's not good for economies to have all our eggs in one basket.
Thank you, Mark. So it looks like that's all of our questions for today. Thank you again to our incredible speakers, Mark, Simon, and Dinesh. I really appreciate you being on today. And thank you again to everyone that's joined us. If you missed part of this webinar, have any questions, or would like to continue the conversation around cost of cloud, please feel free to reach out to sales@civo.com, and we'll be more than happy to chat. Again, thank you again, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.